Okay. Hello and welcome to today's talk. I'm delighted to host another session of our ongoing PMA talk series, and I thank you all for joining us today. I must apologize for my voice. I have a bit of a cold, so I hope it doesn't bother you too much today. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. You can also ask your questions directly after Dr. Zenhari finishes. Okay, so it's a real pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Roxana Zenhari. Dr. Zenhari is a historian of Islamic art, specializing in Persian visual culture with a particular focus on manuscript traditions. Her research explores the relationship between text and image and how these reflect the cultural and political discourses of their time. She completed her PhD in Iranian studies at Georg-August University in 2012, where she is now affiliated as a lecturer. She has published widely, in particular on Inju manuscripts, including the Persian romance of Samak Ayyar and Inju Shahnames. She has also co-authored a book with Professor Martzov on Ali Gholi Khoi and Qajari lithographed books. Today, Dr. Zenhari will present a paper titled From Manuscript to Carpets, the Talking Tree Motif in the Service of Safavid Sufi Discourse. She will explore formal and conceptual connections across a group of Safavid objects, including 2 inscribed rocks, several illuminated folios, and a manuscript of the Khamseh. She will tell us about the motif of the talking tree, which emerges as a unifying visual and symbolic element across these works. Roxana, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot again for your kind invitation. I'm very glad that I'm here, and thank you for all people who join us here. I hope you find the talk engaging and it inspires a fruitful discussion. This study originated from an inquiry into the tradition of grave carpets and rugs endowed to sacred Shi'i shrines. In the course of this investigation, I encountered 2 inscribed Safavid rugs presented in a 2007 book catalog by Gulbenkian Shirvani. One preserved in the Gulbenkian Museum, Lisbon, and another one in the Cincinnati Art Museum in Ohio. The date woven in the Gulbenkian carpet and the artist's name knitted on the Cincinnati carpet led to them being ascribed to the royal workshop of Shah Tahmasp reign 1524 to 1576. Although the terms rug and carpet are frequently used interchangeably, I will employ the term rug in this context, given its more appropriate connotations in terms of scale and functional use. The images of the rugs were first published in a book by Ernst Kuhnel in 1963, but it was Shirvani who was the first scholar focused on decoding the calligraphy of the inscribed poems, which were neglected for a long time. Shirvani's work confirmed their function as grave rugs endowed to the Mashhad Shrine. More crucially, it opened up new horizons for studying Shi'i arts and showed the poems' links with Sufi esotericism. In this paper, I seek to examine how visual form, recurring motifs, and inscribed text contributed to the construction of a message aligned with Shi'i doctrine. To understand the intended message conveyed by the creators within the Safavid context, and through an intertextual lens, I examine the motif of the talking tree, or Vaqvaqtiri, or Vaq, the primary visual element featured in the 2 rugs under consideration, and numbers of illuminated and illustrated manuscripts and codex, all attributes to Safavid workshop. The knitted Gulbenkian rug is a long horizontal rectangle measuring 93 by 236 centimeters. The silk rug is covered with a famous ornamental motif called Vag, featuring coiling stems and end with the heads of humans, animals, and exotic creatures. In the Gulbenkian Vag, the Vag ornamentation surrounds the inscription located in a central rectangular panel. The text is extended in 4 spandrels held by 4 angels in the corners. According to the Shirvani's report, the text ends with the traces of a woven date that he read as 933 or 1527 and accepted by most scholars as the rug's creation date. Hence, it is thought to be the first completed inscribed silk rug in the Safavid period and consequently the first inscribed grave rug of the era. According to Rapam Poe, from whom Gulbenkian attained this carpet in 1939, it comes from Mashhad Shawan, where the 8th Shi'i Imam is entombed. Except for some differences in details in Cincinnati rug follows the general format of the Gulbenkian rug. The knitted object is 107.3 by 304.8 centimeter and made of silk pile on silk basement. The inscribed poem in the central panel ends with the name of the designer who signed the court servant Muhammad Jafar Koshani or Bande Dargah Muhammad Jafar Koshani. This is likely the great master at the time of Shah Tahmasp, whom we know signed another work, the portrait of a rubab player in the British Museum. Therefore, the rug was probably created in the second quarter of the 16th century. The surface of both rugs is densely filled with the striking motif of the talking tree, which immediately captures the viewer's attention as the most prominent visual element. The motif boasts a long-standing tradition in Persian art. Referred to as Vag, it is identified as the sixth principle of Persian decorative elements in a note inscribed in the preface of the Shah Tahmasp album, dated 969 Hijri. Beyond its ornamental function, however, this motif is also intricately woven into certain narratives. One of the first descriptions of the word Vag tree is recorded in the 9th century book Al-Hayawan by Al-Jahiz, and some centuries later in the 13th century books Nukhbat al-Dawr fi Ajaib al-Bar wal-Bahr, authored by Shamsuddin Damashqi, and Ajaib al-Makhluqat wa Gharaib al-Mawjudat, written by Hazine. The latter can be regarded as one of the earliest sources for the visual representation of the talking tree in the tradition of Persian illustrated manuscripts, a tradition that continued into the early lithographed books. In Qazvini's text, in the chapter devoted to the marvels of the sea, we read among these, there is an island called Waqwa because of the tree bearing that name from which a voice is heard. The people of that land understand something from this song and interpret it as a sign of good weather. The surviving Minai tiles, or numbers of surviving Minai tiles, excavated in an Ilkhani building and an inlaid pen box are decorated with the Vag motif, showing that the ornamentation was prevalent in Iran, at least since the 13th century, with decorative function. The Vag motif evolved over time, gradually incorporating not only animal heads, but also human, demonic, and exotic creatures' heads into this design. The story of the talking tree is mentioned in the Shahnameh in an episode about Alexander the Great, whose death is predicted by a tree that bears fruit with talking heads. The story of Alexander was rewritten by the Persian poet Nizami, who focused on the mystical aspect of the narrative and added more details about the king Alexander into who going missing in the dark land, searching for the immortal fountain. These narratives proved particularly compelling, becoming a favored subject in early illustrated Shahnameh manuscripts, as well as in illustrated copies of the Khamseh. The similarity of compositions and designs between some surviving illuminated folios of era dated 929 or 1522 and the formal structure of the two works suggests the unity between these artworks. A central rectangular panel containing the text is prominently featured, surrounded by the rock motif that fills the entire surrounding space, with 4 cartouches positioned in each corner. They could be the product of a collaboration among working of the artists in the Royal Kitabkhane, where, as Sheila Canby has noted, the most rigorous designs used in one medium were adopted to others, so the carpets, textile, ceramic tiles, metal vessels, and in all cases, illustrated and illuminated manuscripts could be decorated with closely related ornament. This highlights the cross-media aesthetic coherence characteristic of the Safavid Kitabkhane's integrated artistic practices. While this intricate pattern likely serves a decorative purpose, a closer reading of the accompanying text may shed light on the function of the rug's design. The text in the Gulbenkian carpet begins from upper left corner motif with words addressing a high celestial character. And then from the margins, the text is written then in the central panel. There we can read, "O you, the chosen of all peoples, who guards those in search of wisdom, those who bow before your feet with their heads covered with dust admire your nobility. Those arrogant and fearless men prostrated before your footsteps, who crumble into ashes with their heads down. Those lost in the valley of misguidance, who through your good grace entered the right path and ready themselves for sacrifice. The throne of magnificence remains forever your domain." In the month of Ramadan, and then we cannot see actually the date 933, which is also woven, and it's what Gulbenkian Shirvani read, who studied the works very, very closely. The terms sargashte, for a lost, bewildered person, خرد پژوه, one seeking wisdom, and وادی غوایت, a stage where one is misguided, are metaphors used actually in Tasawwuf discourse to describe different stages the devotee passes when searching for the truth. The first words, which invoke the high-ranking person as the head of all communities and as a survivor among the people who lost their way in the valley of astonishment, are placed in the spandrels held by 4 angels in the corners of the carpet. Their presence connects the messages to the celestial world and visualizes the notion of malakut. As Henri Carman reminds us, in clarifying the thought of Mullah Sadra, those to whom the angels speak are the imams and the awliya. Considering that, and in reference to the attribution of the carpet's provenance to the Mashhad Shrine Imam Reza, is conceived as a spiritual guide on the way to seeking the truth. So, the content of the poem centers on a mystical journey marked by a sense of bewilderment and a passage through the valley of misguidance depicted as an enigmatic and disorienting realm. But what function does the talking tree motif serve? As a contemporary art historian aware of a deep interconnection between Persian visual culture and literature, Reading the words like Sargashte and Wadi Qawayat aligned with the visual motif of the talking tree evokes for me the episode of Alexander's journey and being lost in the land of the darkness, and an emotional state marked by both disorientation and awe. In doing so, the motif functions as a conceptual counterpart to the poem by forming a unified symbolic system that invites the viewer to delve deeper into the narrative embedded within the design. But was it an intentional choice by the designers too? Although the general form and content of the poem in the Cincinnati Rite is similar to the Gulbenkian carpet, the text is loaded with Shi'i terms that refers directly to Ali and the Prophet's descendants. The opening verse invokes the holy threshold, or Astan Quds, a title most likely alluding to the revered shrine of 8th Shi'i Imam in Mashhad, a sanctified site that continues to bear this hallowed name to the present day. The text continues as follows. These holy threshold and whose dusty path the glorious kings take off the crown of wisdom. Humans and jinns, birds and wild beasts, angels and demons put their heads on the threshold of his majesty. No wonder that they laid their allegiance on the threshold of the prophet's descendants. They succeeded in satisfying their desires because they take the robe of Haydar and ask him for their wishes. To receive divine blessing, the angels spread their feathers under the feet of his pilgrims. It is for the existence of the people of the cloth that this world of the 9 worlds was built. And then in the last 2 verses, we can read, without suffering from the pains of the road, they reached the fountain of life. They left the darkness for Alexander. They take more pleasure from giving their hearts to the cupbearer of Khamseh than from drinking out of the immortal fountain. The text has clear references to Shi'i terminology. Although the ghost of Sufism is still there, the direct mention of Shi'i beliefs made it an utterly proselytized Shi'i script. Mentioning Haydar, the nickname of Ali, Al-Abba, referring to the Shi'i hadith about the Prophet's family, and Saghir Kawsar, another nickname for Ali, it stands in stark contrast to the Gulbenkian text, which uses a metaphoric and mystical language defining the honorable position of the Imam. The second verse, human and genius, birds and wild beasts, angels and demons put their heads on the threshold of his majesty, resonates well with the imagery of the heads depicted in the motif. But final 2 verses of the Cincinnati text make direct reference to Cheshme-i Hayat, or the spring of life, to Zalamat, the land of darkness, and Iskandar himself. These allusions intertwine the narrative with Shi'i beliefs, merging the myth of Alexander's journey into darkness in search of immortality with religious symbolism. In the Shi'i ideology, Ali is the mediator for receiving celestial consecrations preserved in the soul of the Prophet Muhammad. The heavenly Kawsar fountain is a metaphor for Muhammad. Moreover, according to Saqalain Hadith, Kawsar is a fountain in heaven where Muhammad meets his true followers, and Ali will fill believers' cups and serve them celestial water. The poet then benefited from the concepts and meanings that were already established in an old myth about death and immortality, and then created a new myth about it. It does not disclaim the old one, but deviates from it, inviting believers to choose the easier way instead of getting lost in the land of darkness. In the last verse, which compares 2 situations, it is said that the euphoria caused by drinking by Kawsar in heaven is more than that of finding the immortal fountain. The phrase connotes the value of dying as a Shia believer and brings up a new myth about the value of death in questioning for truth in Shia culture. Representations of blooming trees, a fountain, flying birds, and a phoenix denote the heavens and paradise, which is announced to the believers. Visually, this paradise as a bright region separated from the land of darkness which surrounds it. It is as if the imagery evoked by the Gulbenkian rock finds its voice through these words, attaining completion in forms and transcends mere decorated motifs. I have previously noted the forms that transcend mere decorative motifs. I have previously noted the formal and compositional unity among three Safavid folios featuring the talking tree motif. Here I turn to three additional visual productions from the same period to explore how this motif functions beyond the realm of ornamentation in other artistic expressions of the era. On a page fragment preserved in Museum of Fine Arts at Boston, a phrase inscribed within the central panel and surrounded by rock motif reads, "Ey sirr to dar sine har sahib raz." O you, who your mystery is in the heart of all sacred keepers. The hemistich is drawn from the quatrain attributed to Abu Sa'id Abul Khair, the eminent mystic and poet of the 4th, 5th, or 10th, 11th century. Within the discourse of Sufism, the terms sir and ghaz connote mystical experiences encountered on the path of divine truth. These words, imbued with devotional resonance and steeped in Sufi thought, when interwoven with the motif of Bach, evoke the atmosphere of a spiritual enigma and sacred mystery similar to what that was represented in the rocks. In a composition similar to that featuring the Wag motif with corner spandrels and the small panels, the next example presents a central rectangular panel devoted to a delicate drawing of Majnun in the wilderness. The verse positioned above and below the illustration is attributed to the poet Sam Mirza Safavi, who wrote under the pen name Khaja Safi. There we read, صورتگران هلاکم از آن سیم تن جدا سازید صورتی که نباشد ز من جدا. O image makers, I'm perishing in the agony of separation from my silver-bodied beloved. Create an image of her so I may no longer be apart from her. The next verse says, Yusuf نبود چون تو در نیکویی مکلل نقاش نقش آخر بهتر کشد ز اول. Even Yusuf did not match your perfect grace. Painter's last creation surpasses his first. While both verses emphasize a profound love, they are directed toward painters and reflect on the nature of painting or suratgari. The Wag motif, which brings together a variety of creators, serves as a fitting metaphor for the visual artist's skill. Within this context, the image of Majnun, who through the purity of his spirit could converse with wild beasts, embodies the essence of Sufism, deeply rooted in the literary tradition of the mystical love story. The last example is an illustrated manuscript of the Khamseh dated 919 or 1513 and housed in a Topkapi Palace library. In the manuscript, a scene within the Sharafnameh appears under the title assigned by scholars in the book catalogue as Iskandar sits beneath the magic tree Ratbag. However, the image bears no connection to the narrative of Alexander and the talking tree. And it depicts actually Alexander's amazement as seeing the talent of the artists from Rome and China. On one hand, the illustrator employed the talking tree motif as a sign indicating affiliation with the refined tradition of professional painting or suratgari. On the other hand, the pairing of Alexander's iconic gesture of the finger of wonder with the talking tree motif intensifies the expression of astonishment. In this way, the vague motif operates on two levels of meaning. First, by drawing upon the viewer's literary knowledge, it amplifies the themes of astonishment and wonder interwoven with the narrative of Alexander, whose journey in Persian literary tradition serves as a symbol of the quest for esoteric knowledge. Second, through its symmetrical form, the motif alludes to the exquisite paintings executed by Rumi and Chini artists, works that themselves were a source of wonder for Alexander. I would like to briefly return to the initial folios whose formal structure was earlier compared to that of the works. While the central panels feature respectively ghazals from Safavid Būstān and poems of Jami's Yusuf and Zuleykhā, the marginal panels are inscribed with devotional and mystical verses by Attar of Nishabur and Abu Sa'id Abul Khair. So the word of Dus, which is a metaphor for God, is written and repeated in different verses of Abu Sa'id Abul Khair, for example. And another one has also a devotional and mystical content. In doing so, the examination of both form and content in these visual productions from the Safavid workshop, or more precisely from Shah Tahmas's workshop, suggests that the inclusion of the talking tree motif is far from a mere formal or decorative echo of kitabkhane design conventions. Rather, in each of the cited examples, the motif appears within works of mystical and devotional character, intertwining with the viewer's literary memory. This indicates that the integrated artistic practices of the Safavid kitabkhane, in the case of talking tree, extended beyond aesthetic harmony to encompass a deeper conceptual coherence shared among its artists. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. It was really fascinating. I'm sure that everyone enjoyed as much as I did. You beautifully showed such a rich interplay between text and image, and the motif of the talking tree is really a compelling motif that we see it in a variety of media during the Safavid period. I would like to open the floor for questions, so people can put their questions in the chat or just unmute themselves and ask their questions. But I have a question, and regarding your expertise on the lithographed books, I wanted to ask, do you see a continuation of this motif appearing in these books, or was it like a disruption or an extension to this visual tradition when they moved and shifted to lithographed books and manuscripts?
Yes, actually, that is, as I say, that is a very important, one of the very important first first elements of traditional decorative motifs. And it was continued to be represented in lithographed books and in many illuminated in frontispieces of books. But as I saw, in all cases that I saw, they had a decorative function, actually. Or in some other scenes, like the Ajaib al-Mahluqat that you saw in this presentation, that is somehow in relationship with the Waqwaq island or Waqwaq tree, or maybe in some of Shahnameh manuscripts, we can see that. So in relation, directly in relation with the text, but so in a form of metaphoric content, with a sufficiency concept in that. I just saw that in this period, in Safavid period. And even before that, as I saw, the talking tree in one of the cases, for example, there is a tile from the Ilkhan time, and then in the center you can see the motif of the talking tree, and the poem written around that. You can read that, and that is about an episode that Rustam is near the borderline of Turan and wanted to break some trees to make fire. And the only relationship between the poem and this motif is just then it speaks about tree and it's so and nothing more, and it has more the decorative function actually.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, especially on those really early Ilkhani tiles. It was that image that you showed was amazing. And those two rocks were so magnificent.
Wow, the rocks are fascinating, really.
Exactly. Okay, we have a question from Amanda Hanush. Hi, Amanda. Been a long time. So she's asking, thanks so much for this fascinating exploration. Is there something in particular about the Safavid period that you think led to the proliferation of this motif? Why did they use it so much?
Why they use it so much? I really, first of all, thank you very much for the question, dear Amanda. So I'm just thinking about that. Why it is just now so important, I really don't know. Maybe we can have more studying on the poems and mystical written poems of that time. But what is interesting for me is that the concept of usage of that, as a symbol in one hand for professional drawings and paintings, and another part as a symbol of astonishment and being lost, which came to our mind through this somehow literal memory of a person is repeated. So it means that they all were aware of the usage of this concept and not just the usage of the motif. But I just wanted to say that the motif is frequently used in different periods. For example, there is a Timurid Shahnameh. I believe it was preserved. I'm not sure, but I think it was in a museum in Tokaj. But I mean, that is a Shahnameh, and all the marginal of the folios are filled with talking tree motifs. So again, it is popular, it is really beautiful. Because it's not just a vegetated illumination, but it has many other somehow exotic creatures too. So that was popular, but in a way of decorative function. And so it was not just in Safavid time that we can see that a lot, but with this new of concept and new form of conveying the meaning is something that I just encountered in this period.
Yes, thank you. I think, yeah, you're right. They didn't only had this interest in talking tree and all the faces that appear in trees. They also, we see all these mountains that are imbued with lots of portraits. And if you look at all the mountains in the manuscripts of the Safavid time, you can see that there were lots of figures. And when you look back, you see that in the Timurid period, you see that that was the beginning of it. They were trying to hide some faces among the rocks. As you say, yes, the talking tree also was not that popular as in Safavid period, but started in the Timurid period. Interesting, thank you. If there is any questions, please unmute yourself, ask questions, or just send them in the chat. I will read them for you.
Just add something. I'm not an expert actually in rugs and carpets. But I'm not sure I really wanted to see these carpets and examine that. About this second carpet in Cincinnati, I have little doubts even about this, the originality, and because it's a very direct symbolic mentionings in that in poems and then in forms and so on. And then again, it was Open Pope who was behind the sanding the carpets and selling that. So I think that can be fascinating to for a closer, studying about the originality of that. But even so, that's really fantastic. I mean, this combination of forms, design, and the poems.
Yes, absolutely. And we had that famous manuscript in Cincinnati. So yeah, we should probably have a closer look and examine it closely so you can see if everything is original. But it's so fascinating to see not only they have these images, but the complementary literature that comes with it. It's so clear, and it's mentioning the concept in several forms. Do you know who was the poet of those lines in that carpet by Muhammad Jafar Karshi?
Yeah, Muhammad Jafar Koshani. No, I don't know. And it seems that it's not a famous verse because I searched for that in different form, but I didn't find anything.
Right.
So I think it should be, a contemporary and unfamous poet of the time.
Probably. Yes, we have a question from Moya Carey asking if you have identified the poets quoted in the two carpets. So we talked about one of them. Do you know about the other one? Is that also an unknown poet?
Which poet in Cincinnati or
Yeah,
the first one?
this one, yes.
And what's the question?
Do you know the poet of this one as well?
No, it was also not a famous one.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
We have a question. They're asking, were these motifs used in Indian Sufi culture?
I think it was. I just saw a manuscript. I don't know if in Sufi culture of India because I didn't study that, but there is a book of Door of Name, and that's a meeting between Absar and another person of this story. And that's an Indian manuscript, and there we can see also a scene with the talking tree, and so that is also it means a famous narrative which was illustrated. But if the function of the talking tree is also, searching for a conveying a meaning behind it, it really needs more investigation. I cannot answer that actually.
Okay, thank you.
خواهش میکنم.
Yeah, please go on.
No, sorry, I was the person who asked. I'm from India and I've been teaching Persian, and I must say this was a very interesting lecture and would like to know more about this. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much for your attendance.
So the first time that we have the concept of this waq trees is that in Al-Hayawan, we said.
Yes, it seems that it was in Al-Hayawan by Al-Jahiz, but you know, it's not something that like a narrative forms, you know. It's just something like knowledge and informations about the geographical place and so on. So it is, again, not in a narrative form. It's a little something like initial information that we can see in Ajaib al-Makhluqat, for example. But in a form of a narratives, it is in Shahnameh, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
If there is any other question, I would be happy to take them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask questions.
Hello, good afternoon. I have a question.
Please go on, yes.
Yes.
My name is Saide, and I'm seeing your fascinating lecture with one of my Spanish friends that she has a question.
Yes, my name is Anna. Thank you very much. My English is not perfect, and I must say I did not follow completely what you said. So the question I have is more a commentary to see if it has some sense or not at all. I am an admirer of Persian culture, and I've read quite a number of things and follow artists and saw some also beautiful manuscripts and read some books. And when you were talking about the talking trees, and actually in general, sorry, is that right? Yes. In general, when you're talking with about the talking trees and in general about symbolism, and I loved when you started saying the relation between the symbols and the text, but without the text also, only within the illuminated area, no? And I was first wondering that the function of orality in, you say orality, yes, oral tradition in Persian culture is very, very, very rich. And it seems to me that the repetition of symbols in a figurative, let's say, way, it has the same function as orality, repeating these symbols that still have meaning in different times and not forgetting the origin. No, that is something that comes to my mind that I sort of I feel I perceive, but I'm not sure if the aim is this. And concerning the talking trees or mountains or whatever, perhaps it has to do with you say the, ¿cómo decías, animation? The
Animismo.
Animism in literature, when you give the words to the things, as if the things talks, things or nature or animals or whatever. And I think it has to do with that, you know, like I think Persian art is very sensitive towards nature, and normally the representation of nature is representing what nature feels. You know, it's a beautiful dialogue, I think, with human beings and nature as a whole, no? And they give word to the trees as a testimony, as an independent testimony of what's happening, as another layer meaning. No, does this have any sense? I think I saw it. I think I read it in the beautiful Pamuk book about, My Name is Red, all about miniatures, which is really beautiful. And there's a moment, I think, in a cafe that there is a storyteller man, and he shows drawings, and the drawings talk. And there's a dog passing that talks, and there's a tree that talks. And so all these, and there was also, I don't know if it was in a tree, also in what you mentioned of Nesami, the Leili and Majnun, there's also this kind of animation. No? Well, that's all I wanted to ask. And forgive me if I understood not properly, because for me, it's an effort.
Thank you very much for your comments. I think you have, so you're absolutely right about somehow the spirit of oral traditions there. And so we cannot forget that these rugs were, I think, in a very, not sacred place, but I mean, when it was the cover of the grave, so Pushe Shekab, it means it was a cover for the grave of the Imam, so entombed there and in a sacred place. So that's what, and also considering the material used in that, we know, and also considering that it was even woven in the royal workshop, that was a precious one, and that was produced for the somehow the privileged ones to see that and to enjoy that. But I mean, at least the creators, the designers were completely aware about these literatures and even the Sufismist literatures. But I agree that the spirit of oral tradition were always there. So because during this research, I just thought that about the similarity of these two stories about Alexander in Shahnameh and then in Sharafnameh Khamseh. And it is very interesting that Nizami has focused more on the stages that Alexander is lost in the Dark Land. And it is interesting that there is no talking tree in this episode at all in Nizami's. But even in my head, and always they are mixed together. So, and I mean that even they not verse by verse read that in a book, but they have this story in their mind somehow. I think not just me, but the other persons who know about the Alexander journey, they have a mix of it that they read or they hear from Shahnameh and also Sharafnameh. And then they know that all of these elements or somehow this theatrical form element of talking tree, of land of darkness, of immortal fountain, they are interwoven together without knowing that, for example, talking tree is just an element which is described in Shahnameh and not in Khamseh. So for this reason, I think these productions were also somehow laid on the memory of people. I mean, this cultural cognitive memory of these people who see the carpets.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Roxana.
You're welcome.
I do not see any more questions in the chat, and so I think I should thank you again so sincerely for being here, joining us, and for this really rich and super interesting talk.
Just one note about what Dr. Mayokari asked about the
Identity of the poet.
Identity of the poet. If you want, I can send you the poems, and maybe you can find a clue for that. But I couldn't find it, and it was, for me, it was also very interesting. But I mean, the quality of the version is not so high that we can say that was probably for a very famous one. So I think maybe that was the main reason that we could not find it. And even in searching in the internet, in Ganju website and other places that they preserve this, and also in other websites like the Shi-e-Nur and other websites which are concentrated on religious one. And sometimes they have some versions, but as the usage for the contemporary traditions of in Ashura or in other occasions, but not as a preserved poem with the name of the poet. But I will be appreciate if Moya can help me to find the poet.
Yeah, thank you. I think there were lots of local poets, and also if you look at the cultural environment within the what do you call it? The royal libraries, everyone was a poet. So I have so many of these really beautiful poems that we do not know who was the poet, but we know that they were coming from someone who was also a calligrapher, was working in these royal workshops, and they are having these magnificent, really with layers of meanings and beautiful poetry. And those were like everyone was a genius in literature. Everyone would be, very well versed in writing any literary text, including poems. So it's so understandable that some of these guys do not leave a name, and we do not have the identification for all of these things. But it's great. Thank you so much for sharing all this beautiful information. And many thanks to all of you who joined us today, and especially to those of you who contributed to the discussion. We hope you join us for the next session in June. The details will be on the website shortly. Until then, take care and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.